All right.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Oh, goodness, I hope there isn't going to be an echo. Good evening. It is Wednesday, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and we are back for It's Elemental. And today with me we have, well, two of our my guest panelists, Julian Crawford, who is a writer and a philosopher, a political analyst and a politician from South Island. And he has just written a little booklet on Plato. So that's an interesting side note. So, hey, Julian.
Hey, Bob. Good to be back with you. And, cheers for all the introduction. The book on Plato's philosophy will hopefully be out soon, so that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, awesome. I mentioned that for you, Roger. Thank you for all your support and everything. I know you're watching. So it's really good that you have been so interested. And also welcome Griffin Lad. Oh, and hello, Boomer. You just jumped in. Hey, guys. Thanks for being with us. It's great. And Roger, Vince is really looking forward to seeing you again on Thursday, midnight. So that is going to be a really excellent show, a follow-up. Going to delve, if anybody's here is interested, they're going to be discussing the Greeks. So yes, that's our second special panelist, Vince McLeod. Hey, Vince.
Hello, Bob. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good.
G'day, Internet. G'day, Internet. Thanks for the live chat comments that have come in already. And hello, Julian. Good to talk to you again, mate.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Awesome. And I hope you have all diligently read the article that Vince left in the comments. He wrote an article this week on self-will versus determinism from an elementalist perspective. So, Vince, I thought maybe you could start us off by giving us a little bit of a rundown of where we've been with elementalism, sort of the overview that we've presented so far, and why looking at at free will and determinism is the logical next step here.
Well, elementalism, as the followers of this show so far will be aware, elementalism is the religious and spiritual philosophy based around the idea that consciousness is the prima materia and that consciousness is the fundamental element of all of reality. That relates to free will. I'll summarize what the free will debate is. Free will is when people believe that humans have the ability to make their own choices and determine their own fates. So that relates to whether or not a person has the will, free will, to shape the direction of their own lives, or is their life in fact shaped by powers outside of their control. Now, the opposite to free will is determinism. Determinism holds that essentially you don't get to decide, people don't get to decide what they do. They cannot direct their lives. Their lives are in fact determined by the structure of their brain and the order of the physical world. So this question, free will versus determinism, has a lot of philosophical implications and is one of the major philosophical issues of all time. So it's really great that we can get to discuss that from an elementalist perspective, because elementalism has some very good ideas that can help people to understand free will and make it make sense to people.
Mm-hmm. How do you see it, Julian?
Yeah, that's right. I think with the materialist mindset, determinism goes hand in hand with a belief in materialism. And, this is really diametrically opposed to the belief in free will, because obviously with no creator, everything is hard determinism. So it's based on the idea that physical particles are crashing into each other, and this is causing all of the effects, essentially, which are just a chain reaction going through time. So the idea that we don't have free will is linked with a belief in materialism, which, as you say, is opposed by the elementalist perspective that we do have. So plenty to discuss there.
Yeah. One interesting thing about determinism is that it's very popular nowadays on account of the fact that materialism has basically triumphed as the overall belief of the world. The determinists will say that a human being is born, but you're born with a set of instincts, and these instincts have evolved. So your instincts decide what it is that you want to do and how you want to win your life. A determinist would say that all of us, you can see that all of us just struggle for resources, all of us struggle for social dominance, all of us struggle for social acceptance, and these things are really instincts that prove, according to the determinist, that we don't actually have any free will. Even if you're not operating on the basis of instinct, you can be operating on the basis of conditioning, which is to say that if something happens to you early in your life and it makes you suffer, or something happens to you in your life and makes you feel good, then you will either come to avoid that thing instinctively, or you will come to seek after that thing instinctively. So determinism says that you are evolved, you are conditioned, and therefore you don't actually get to decide what you do, although you may think you do, but you don't. So if I, for example, I want to have a cup of tea instead of a cup of coffee, a determinist will say that I prefer tea for various reasons that have got nothing to do with my free will. And so I can't really decide to want tea instead of coffee. I just have to sort of go along with what my physiology and my nervous system decides that I want to like. So that's the essential determinist belief. And it's the mainstream belief now that scientific materialism is also the mainstream belief. As Jules mentioned earlier, materialism is very, very closely associated with materialism. And so anybody who really questions the materialist paradigm starts to think that free will is possible after all.
Yeah, of course, neuroscientists like to claim that there is no free will and that it's just all these processes happening in the brain. But of course, it's very much an open debate. It hasn't been resolved by, nobody's been able to prove that free will doesn't exist. So, of course, it's one of the major debates in philosophy, along with, does God exist and what is the separation of the mind and the body. So these are some of the three of the big topics in philosophy. And of course, free will is linked with the idea that if you believe in God, then obviously God has free will. And the idea that when he creates us as fragments of consciousness or as a soul, then that reflects essentially the consciousness of God and therefore also has free will. So it's very much linked with whether or not you believe in God, because if you don't believe in God, you're much more likely to believe, like you say, in a hard deterministic model, which is where, you have this idea of hard determinism and soft determinism. Hard determinism is where every single thing is just totally, you have zero control. It's just a chain reaction of events. Soft determinism might be like, maybe you could make a choice, but your circumstances have caused you to be in a situation where you don't have free will. So, yeah, it's very much along the lines of what we've debated previously about whether or not this God consciousness exists, ties in with whether or not you're likely to believe in free will.
I think it's worth reading out a section from Elementalism. Here we are. This is a section that's very relevant. Chapter 29, the Elementalist Conception of Free Will. 29.7 says, the Elementalist perspective on free will is that mainstream philosophy has missed the point entirely. Now, recall from what we've spoken about previously when it comes to elementalism, is that elementalists don't believe in time, and the belief in elementalism is that consciousness is the prima materia, and that the material world is an illusion that's been dreamed up for the sake of entertainment. Now, keep that in mind as I read the rest of this section. 29.8. Elementalists believe that all of us are fundamentally individuated fragments of the total consciousness that is God, and that these fragments of consciousness traverse the great fractal by way of matching frequencies. Now, Julian related to that earlier, And this will make more sense if you've seen the previous episode where we spoke about frequency and vibration. Now, to the elementalist, there is no material world. Every fragment of consciousness is aware of a set of perceptions, and every set of perceptions exists somewhere in the great fractal. These sets of perceptions change.
Oh no. What has happened?
Is he frozen, has he?
So frozen. Goodness me.
Consciousness changes.
Back. Oh, you're gone.
Am I back now? Oh, good. Oh, no, not again.
Yeah, you're back now. I think you just froze for a moment.
Oh, good.
Okay. Oh, you're frozen again. Oh, dear. Are you back?
Still frozen.
No, you're back.
Still frozen. Oh, good.
Okay, so you were at 27.9, did you say?
14%. That's where I were before. Now I'm up to, 27.9. I read that out. So the elementalist, there is no material world. Every fragment of consciousness is aware of a set of perceptions.
Okay.
Perceptions change as the frequency of one's consciousness changes.
Right, we're not getting it.
Yeah, well, cognition and perception, obviously that relates to what Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, right? So obviously we have the ability for cognition and perception, and that relates to our ability to process language and have thoughts. You know, our mind is believed to require language or a meta language and able to be able to have thoughts, and through those thoughts we can have logical processes going on in the brain which can allow us to make conscious choices between multiple different options. So obviously there's definitely the appearance of free will, and I believe that we do have free will, but obviously it's an ongoing debate. But the fact that we can have this reasoning ability, that could suggest that we can make decisions that affect our future, but we're also under the influence of causation from the past and potentially from future events as well.
Mm.
Can you guys hear me now? I've cut the video off.
Yes,
yep.
That's quite clear. Yes.
Hello, Boomer suggested I cut the video, so I just did that.
Good.
But I'd like to keep reading.
Hello, Boomer.
I'd like to keep reading. It was important.
You'll need to start again because we haven't heard from the beginning.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
All right. I'll start again. 29.
Oh dear.
On free will is that mainstream philosophy has missed the point entirely. Elementalists believe that all of us are fundamentally individuated fragments of the total consciousness that is God, and that these fragments by way of matching frequencies. Now, what's important to is that
Julian, are you hearing?
Oh, I mean, I picked up a lot of the first bit, but yeah, unfortunately we're having technical difficulties there.
I think the best thing will be for him to tell maybe you. Do you know where he's reading from?
I just don't have the book in front of me at the moment.
I have the book, but I don't know where he was in the book. Elementalist conception of order and chaos, good and evil, meaning of life, truth and falsehood. Oh dear, that's a bit sad.
So,
okay, so
I think he was talking about how our consciousness is moving through the great fractal. Essentially, it's perceiving different aspects of the great fractal. So the idea of free will is that we can navigate at will through different parts of the great fractal. So obviously, like, we're not 100% just operating on free will all the time. There's other events external to us that are having a causal effect on us. So if you're basing your causation on the past, say, you're just going to get up on Monday morning and go to work and go through your normal routines because that's what you've done every week previously. But if you decide that you want to do something different than your normal routine, then that's choosing from a range of different potential events in the future. So it's through that choice that you're essentially exercising your free will to take your life in a different direction, or to direct your consciousness in a different direction, to have different experiences of the great fractal. So hopefully we can get Vince back on, because he will be able to explain what he was reading there a lot better, of course.
Let me read it. I found it while we wait for him to rejoin. Let me, he started off at this bit that said, the elementalist perspective on free will is that mainstream philosophy has missed the point entirely. Elementalists believe that all of us are fundamentally individuated fragments of the total consciousness that is God, and that these fragments of consciousness traverse the great fractal by way of matching frequencies. To the elementalist, there is no material world. Every fragment of consciousness is aware of a set of perceptions, and every set of perceptions exists somewhere in the great fractal. These sets of perceptions change as the frequency of one's consciousness changes. Therefore, in order to change the world, it's only necessary to change the frequency of one's consciousness. This can be achieved through repeated exertions of pure will. Now that's fascinating to me. Repeated exertions of pure will. That's sort of like in meditation, in concentration. How do you understand that?
Yeah, of course. It's even similar to prayer in the Christian tradition, but yes, meditation, and it all comes back to frequency, as we talked on a previous show, the frequency and the vibration. So being able to raise that frequency at will is what allows you to explore different parts of the great fractal by the law of attraction, so attracting frequencies that are on a similar wavelength. So that's the idea, that the free will is what allows us to raise our frequency. So by going up and down a spectrum of frequency, we can obviously we can just not do any meditation and go out and just be decadent and indulgent and things like that, but it's going to be low frequency. If we are doing spiritual practice, meditation, and consciously trying to raise our frequency, then that will allow us to reach a higher level of consciousness. So that's where it relates to free will, by being able to make that conscious choice, because if people don't believe in free will, they're less likely to behave in a moral fashion.
So basically what you're saying is it comes down to you being able to control your own mind and your own response to the world. That's what the essence of free will is.
Well, it's like you're saying, all the perceptions, the mind is perceiving all of this reality, but the perception relies on us to process it and make rational decisions, logical choices. And so it's the mechanism of our mind which is allowing us to have this choice. Without choice, there couldn't be free will.
Right.
So,
Julian, an audience, Vince usually monitors the questions. And since he's not here, I'm just going to see if I can do it. I thought that I would ask this interesting one. Griffin Ladd left this at the beginning of the show, and it seems quite an interesting perspective. It says, Amy Benjamin believes that JFK knew that he would have to sacrifice himself. Steve McQueen knew that he would die at 50, and he did. How does elementalism view the preordained argument?
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating topic because that, like he says, people sometimes have a premonition or they know in advance that something's going to happen or that they could die on a certain date, such as JFK. So, you know, it's a big question. How can you have free will if certain events are already predetermined to happen in the future? And like I say, when we make a decision and create a certain future, then that future does have somewhat of a reverse causality effect, which is certain events in the future do affect our past. So it brings us towards that event. So, of course, people, you know, see this as a challenge to free will, but there's also the possibility that we have free will, but a higher intelligence already knows what we're going to decide beforehand. So it's very much a paradox. I mean, it certainly sounds like a paradox. Of course, this is why the topic of free will is so complex, and that, you know, I was struggling to come up with all the thoughts at the start of the show as well, you know.
It's a hard, yeah. And I mean, so the thing is that from the very first moment of the creation of the very first atom, a course of events was put in process, in place. And the way things have happened have determined the way other things have happened. So, in a way, we're so small and so insignificant that we don't affect anything. So for me, it's sort of a question of scale. From one point of view, the universe is going to do what the universe is going to do. And ages will come and ages will go, and empires will rise and empires will fall, and nothing that we do will have any difference or make any difference. But on the other hand, every single thing that you do and every single decision that you make is a vital decision because it changes the future, as you were pointing out. You have all unchosen pathways.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as we mentioned, it's very much tied into whether or not you believe in God or the creator or the higher intelligence, because in the mainstream science, in the Big Bang theory, it's based on materialism and atheism. They just think the Big Bang happened and then there's just a chain reaction of just classical mechanics. So all of these atoms are just essentially just going out and causing it through linear time, and there's no free will. Everything's just happened by random chance.
Yes.
But when you believe in intelligent design, then that goes hand in hand with a belief in free will. You know, like I said, as fragments of consciousness, we have free will, much like God has free will, but we're constrained very much within certain parameters, whereas obviously the God entity has free will over the entire system. Like in the simulation hypothesis, you would say that's the programmer of the simulation, so they have free will to change anything that's in the code of that program. Whereas the character in the computer game, say, you know, like an NPC character in a game, you know, they might have the ability to choose whereabouts they walk around within that game. And, you know, they might have certain limited amount of free will within the constraints of the system.
Is it important to be able to choose? Okay, I think that I won't ask that. I actually realized when you were talking that I'm coming here from my predetermined point of view, because Vince isn't here with elementalism, and I'm filling in, but I'm not filling in from the point of view of elementalism. So I'm thinking that maybe I shouldn't say what I think. I should ask you.
Well, I think
yes.
One important aspect from the point of view of elementalism is the idea that, you know, outside of linear time as we experience it, the past, present, and the future is all happening simultaneously. This is certainly, you know, a belief that is common amongst people who have spiritual beliefs or elementalist beliefs, so that the past, present, and the future is all interacting simultaneously. So even if something's predetermined in the future, that doesn't mean that there's not the possibility to somehow, you know, if you know that you're going to be assassinated, in theory, you could make a decision to do something differently and avoid that situation. So it's not necessarily 100% determined. It's more like a probability of how probable that outcome is.
Okay, there is another question here from Griffin Lad that says, Jordan Peterson has said that children at around the age 7 decide whether to live on or go back and start again. A do-over, if you like. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I haven't heard that before, but I assume they're referring to what we've talked about on the previous shows with reincarnation. So assuming if people have the ability to just reincarnate at will, then maybe people do relive the same lifetime over and over and try and do it better each time. But obviously it's hard to know whether we have total free will over our reincarnation process, because there's also, like we've talked about, the karma. So when you reincarnate, your negative karma can affect your next lifetime. But that ties into free will, because by using our free will, like you've mentioned, by raising the frequency, you can overcome all that negative karma. So that karma is like the determinism, which is sending you on a deterministic path, but the free will is the means by which you overcome the negative karma. And then potentially you can direct your consciousness at will into whatever certain reality, you know.
That's very empowering to think that, to believe that. I mean, to have a belief system like elementalism that tells you that you can control things by your own free will, instead of, oh, well, you know, do your best, you'll be right. It's just a different way of phrasing things, isn't it? That it allows you to think in terms of, I don't know, taking the responsibility for doing the right thing, because that's what it's all about. That's sort of where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, I mean, that's the free will is really fundamental to how we can navigate through reality and, you know, explore the great fractal, essentially. So, like you say, having free will, you know, knowing that we have free will and that we have the ability to essentially manifest our own destinies, because people talk a lot about manifesting things these days, and it's, you know, a lot of the time people are not doing it successfully, but in some instances people are able to essentially take something that's a concept in their mind and then focus on themselves doing that goal in the future and seeing themselves in their dream role or whatever, and then eventually working towards that goal. So it's the free will that's putting that goal in the future and then sort of turning the concept into the reality.
It's the reality.
And then,
yes.
Yeah, and of course the opposite, when you tell someone there is no free will, they've done experiments, psychological experiments, where people are more likely to behave in a moral fashion, or they're more likely to cheat on exams and tests that they're doing, because they've just given the participants a piece of paper to read all about how they don't have free will. So it immediately causes people to suddenly think, well, I can just do whatever I want now and be just decadent and indulgent, or sin, or, misbehaving, because they'll think, well, it's not my fault,
Right.
It's all predetermined. But then if you get arrested and go up in front of the judge and say, well, Your Honour, it was just hard determinism, I had no choice to commit a crime, then they'll say, no way, you're off to jail, you did it of your own free will. So it's a fundamental aspect of the justice system that the defendant has free will when they commit the crime, right?
But even if they don't have free will, even if they're forced to do that crime because of their past circumstances or their karma or whatever it is, they still have to go to jail. Because if their karma is driving them like that, then there is no safe place for them in society. So that's the argument of why jail shouldn't be a punishment for some people. Maybe there should be sort of like a two-tiered jail system, or, incarceration system, where there are people who make decisions to deliberately be vicious. And that does need a punishment. But where there are people who are just a victim of their circumstances, I don't know, maybe that is I don't know, is that a nuance of free will?
Yeah, it's certainly a fascinating debate, because, when you go up in front of a courtroom, you can't exactly just say that it wasn't my fault. So, yeah.
Although you can blame being drunk. I know some.
Yeah, I mean, you're not supposed to be able to get off for being drunk, but
I know somebody who got off for being drunk because he said I wasn't responsible for my actions because I was drunk. And so the judge said, oh, okay, go home then.
But yeah, like you say, people have to be put in jail even if they, don't have free will, but,
anyway,
unless, of course, they're the victim. But, of course, this experiment has shown that if you tell people they don't have free will, then they're going to behave worse. But this is exactly what society is doing on a wider scale, with all the scientists, the neuroscientists and so on, telling everyone that they don't have free will and that free will's an illusion. This is causing society to behave in a less moral fashion. So by spreading the message to people that they do have free will, people actually behave better and treat each other with more respect and everything like that.
Because their vibration changes. Their level of excitement and enthusiasm for life changes. And therefore the whole vibe of society changes. So that's why one person can make a difference. Wow, how interesting. It's interesting, that thing that like the choices that you make can improve other people's lives, not just your own. That gives it another dimension to free will, because you do have this free will, the control over yourself. That's one thing, that's one, like really important part of life. But not just control over yourself, but more than that is what, I think how Vince puts it, is what part of the great fractal you occupy. You're attracted to that part of the great fractal that you're giving the vibrations out. So if you're giving out happy vibrations, you'll be attracted to the happy part. Am I right?
Yeah, well, we often associate with people that are on a similar vibration to ourselves. And yeah, like you say, people can use their free will to help other people and help those around them and raise their their vibrations and things like that. Because ultimately, you know, from an elementalist perspective, you recognize that the true self is like the God self, and that every other person is just another aspect of the God self. So it's like seeing yourself in other people, or like the golden rule, like treat other people as you would have them treat you. So it's by recognizing some of these spiritual truths about the oneness of humanity, you know, that we have more empathy for other people, and that by using our will, we can, you know, not only support each other, but transform society towards a more enlightened type of society.
Yes. All right, there's one other topic that we had lined up to talk about, and that is the grandfather paradox. So I think if we'll talk about that a little bit, and then I'll have a look in the chat to see if we've got any questions, because I don't think we'll be able to listen to you and read the chat at the same time. So we'll be looking for questions. So just hang in there, guys. Right, but first of all, let us cover the grandfather paradox, Julian.
Yeah, so the grandfather paradox is based on time travel, when a time traveler travels back in time, and, you know, what happens if someone kills their own grandfather in the past, because then they would never be able to have offspring, and then that person would never be born in the first place, in which case they never would have been able to go back in time and commit the murder. So it's like a recursive cycle. So that is the paradox, essentially. Essentially, if you're a time traveler and you go back in time and you make any change in the past, that could have significant effects on the present day where you've come from. So this is, of course, a big question in the whole theory of time travel. What would happen in such a hypothetical scenario? And Vince was going to talk about how elementalism addresses and solves this paradox, but unfortunately he's not on the stream, of course. So maybe we'll have to continue next week. We've had unfortunate technical issues this week, so maybe we'll have to keep the show a bit shorter this week, but we'll definitely revisit this grandfather paradox, because it would be good to hear what Vince has to say about it as well.
Yes. So let's see, let's do a little bit of question and answer section, and then we will call it a night, because yes, Vince is really the master of this topic. So, Hello Boomer says, a determinist's views must, by their own definition, be determined and therefore have no basis to be taken seriously. After all, this means other views are also determined and be equally true.
Yeah, that's ironic that people who believe in determinism, you know, their theories, you know, they don't have any free will in coming up with those concepts, you know, so there's no guarantees that they're going to be correct.
If we are determined, 100% determined, then does that mean that we are androids and we are just operating on a program?
Yeah, well, there's the idea that we're purely observing our lives and that we have no ability to influence the course of our lives, and we're simply just watching it unfold. But you know, there's certainly the appearance that we have the ability to have free will and make decisions. And I, you know, believe that free will exists because it's not just, if there was just the past influencing the future, then maybe you could have determinism happening in a linear fashion. But when you have both the past and the future influencing the present, then there's a dynamic interplay between those two things. We have to decide whether we're going to follow the habits and routines of the past or whether we're going to do something different in the future. So that's why I believe that free will is really a true thing and that we really do have free will. And yeah, it relates to another question in the chat here.
Yes.
Does consciousness have free will? From Hello Boomer.
Right. Oh.
So.
Interesting.
So.
Does it?
Yeah. Well, I would argue that consciousness does have free will because it's the ultimate mind of God. It's God has omnipotence, which means all powerful. So having all power means being able to do anything at will. So if you believe that God split his consciousness to create all the different souls, all the different personalities, then each of those personalities essentially has similar traits to God, because the idea of us being made in the image of God, we also have free will because consciousness have free will. So yes, I believe that the two are linked.
That's so fascinating because, like, the physical world has limitations. There are things that cannot happen here. I mean, if gravity stopped working for an instant, that would be it. Everything would explode. So there are laws that cannot change. And so the idea that, oh, God can do anything isn't actually true, because God can't do anything without exploding the world. So,
well, that's right, yeah.
Do that, then could consciousness. But then, according to Vince, none of this exists. What exists is consciousness. And so all the neurotransmitters and brain cells and everything are not where free will is. Free will is in consciousness.
Yeah, well, I mean, we certainly are very constrained in how we can exercise our free will. Like, we have free will and the ability to make choices between different options, but we're very much limited by our circumstances often as what those options might be. In terms of the God consciousness, like the consciousness would have to essentially dream up this physical world or will this physical world into existence. So there's the idea of the logos that language was used to is more fundamental than the physical reality, because language is what makes up the mind and the thoughts, and that it's through the the will of the mind which creates the physical reality. So in theory, God would have to will this world into existence for there to be a big bang or whatever, and presumably maintains it by will. It's like the simulation hypothesis is analogous to a computer game. God is like the programmer of the computer game, and they can run that computer game, but they still have the ability to switch off that computer at any time. So, in theory, God is believed to be all-powerful because, we might think that there's certain constraints, but if matter is emerging from the quantum realm, it's not that it's not necessarily all fake. I mean, things that certainly appear real to us, but it's just that they're made up of a lot of thin air and a lot of energy. It's not solid matter. It's a dense form of energy that's emerging from the ether.
Wow. How interesting. Okay. So, are there any more questions here? Do we have... materialists replace the word God with the word energy. An explanation of where the energy came from is never provided. That's something you've touched on before, isn't it? But from an elementalist point of view, the energy is the consciousness, and the consciousness is the prima materia.
Yes, that's correct.
So,
obviously, the materials don't explain where all the energy in the universe comes from, that's for sure. But if you believe that God is consciousness and that consciousness is essentially the most fundamental thing which gives rise to all the energies in the universe. So, I mean, it's still hard to explain where all that comes from in the first place, but obviously we know that consciousness exists because we have consciousness. It comes back to that I think, therefore I am statement. So it's very interesting.
Does consciousness have emotion, Julian? Is there an emotional element to consciousness?
Yeah, well, like Vince has said, there's the contents of consciousness, which is all the subjective experiences that we have. If you consider consciousness to sort of be like the most pure form of energy, then the contents of consciousness is what that energy self-transforms into for us to have subjective experiences like smells and tastes and emotions and things like that. So the great fractal contains emotions, it contains thoughts, it contains language and perceptions and all of those things.
Okay.
And
so it could contain its own emotional content would be right. Gosh, okay, let me see if there's another question. Get Vince in the text chat here. Did Vince jump in here? Oh no, he went. Does consciousness have free will? Okay, we said that one.
There's a new question at the bottom there.
Okay, there's this one on Anthony Daniels. Anthony Daniels believes that a century of criminology's belief in determinism is why sentences are so low these days. Oh, right.
Well, that could explain, that could be explain why judges are so lenient on people, because they think that it's not really their fault. Of course, we hear this argument with minorities and so-called oppressed groups in society, underprivileged groups, that it's not their fault. So that certainly, would explain the reduction in sentencing. And of course, when you believe that someone does have free will, then you believe that they should suffer proper consequences proportionate to their actions.
I think it's quite insulting, really, to think that people don't have free will. I mean, why do we bother to try? Why do we get out of bed in the morning? If all we are is NPCs in God's video game, then why bother? Why not all just be in jail? Actually, that's what you...
So, Griffin Ladd has said here, is the great fractal selfish or benevolent overall, or is that irrelevant? So, in Plato's Republic, he talks about the three levels essentially being like the material world, the world of ideas, which is the world of forms, and then at the top is the supreme good. So God is called the supreme good. So the two words, God and good, are essentially the same word. So the idea is that morality and goodness comes from the Creator, and that it is benevolent, that it is overall benevolent. That is why, as we talked about the fundamental rightness of the universe, the cosmic joke in previous shows, because the great fractal is overall benevolent, but it also creates all sorts of different experiences, including negative and evil. It has split itself into positive and negative forces for the sake of the cosmic drama, or the interplay of those forces. just like we've talked about masculine and feminine and good and evil. These are the forces which make up the quadrigetu. So while it is overall benevolent, it contains also all the evil within itself.
Mm. And that must be why we suffer, is because we are separated into these fragments, and why we long to be reunited with the unified consciousness.
Yeah, well, the so-called problem of evil is related to, people think, well, if there's a God, why would there be evil in the world? Because surely God would just put a stop to it straight away. But it could be that because we have free will, we are put into a situation where we are left to use our own free will. And, God doesn't necessarily just intervene all the time. It's the God consciousness is essentially, having an effect all the time on a subtle level, but but the evil and the suffering is also part of the experience which we've chosen to endure just for the sake of growing and learning from that experience and learning how to overcome suffering. As we've spoke about in the past, that being in spiritual bliss may get boring and that people have to forget all of their knowledge and relearn it again just for the experience.
And it's overcoming suffering that is entertaining to the gods. That's the point, isn't it? Is to prove you can do it and to rise to the occasion.
Yeah. And there's one more good question there. Hello Boomer has said, how do you know yourself? So this is a very interesting question, because as we've touched on, when you ultimately try and find your true self, you find that pure fragment of consciousness, and you find that that consciousness is connected in with all the other consciousness in the universe, and that ourselves and other people are essentially just different aspects of God. So it makes it very hard to say who ourselves are, other than say that we are gods, which sounds a bit egotistical, of course, but there may be more to our personalities that is shaped by our past experiences that we might not necessarily be aware of. So it's believed that there's many geniuses living on Earth, but most of those people have forgotten that they're geniuses, and they're having to, relearn that, or they're living out, not so smarter lives because they've forgotten that knowledge. So I think to know our true self is, like we talked about, trying to get in touch with the higher self. We might be able to find out who we are, but personally, that might sound strange, but I don't know who I am really.
I thought it was really interesting last week when you were talking about your higher self, and I think you sort of almost made a comment like, or God, my higher self, or God, as if there was a chance that the voice that we call our higher self could in fact be the voice of God. But sitting here and thinking about these things, it seems like it's almost inevitable that voice must be consciousness informing us of higher things, higher levels of consciousness. So almost between our minds and this other entity.
Yeah, well, like I touched on the problem of the mind-body connection. There must be something that connects us to the higher mind, and our self-identity may be that thing which connects in with higher consciousness. So fascinating topics. We're going to have to come back next week, I think, because we've been plagued with technical difficulties this week.
Yes, but what an interesting topic, and what a fantastic discussion. And thank you so much, guys. If you have anything else that you'd like to ask us, I think we're just about to wrap this up. Yep, we've got, 5 minutes until the hour. So next sort of something that you particularly would like to know? Griffin Lad, hello Boomer, Dulupa?
I was watching a really interesting video before that relates to free will, and it's by a real genius guy with a very high IQ. So I'll just see if I can get the link.
Oh, that'll be good. All right, while you look for that, I will just remind you guys that Vince will be talking, and Vince and Julian, will you both be there on Thursday midnight with Roger? You're going to be talking philosophy, the Greeks, Plato, interesting stuff. So yeah, if any questions come up between now and then, that should be fun. And oh right, you put the link up there?
Yeah, that was a video that people can go to, a guy called Chris Langan, a very high IQ guy, and he's talking a lot more about quantum physics and stuff and how it relates to the mind. So definitely check that show out as well. And we'll be back next week, and we've got the show. Is it tomorrow? Is it?
No, not tomorrow. Not tomorrow night. That's Wednesday. The day after.
Yeah.
So 2 days time. Awesome. And then of course we'll be back on Saturday with the Alternative Center podcast. So lots more content for you to catch, guys. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you very much, Julian, for carrying the whole show this evening. That was really awesome of you, and thanks for all your insights and everything. It was a great, great conversation. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Bob, and thanks to all the audience for sticking with us, and we'll see you guys again next time.
Good night.